Welcome to British Focus, your go-to channel for the latest political debates and breaking news from the UK. Today, we dive into one of the most intense and heated sessions of Prime Minister's questions, where tensions ran high and sharp exchanges dominated the chamber. As always, the stakes were enormous, with pressing issues on immigration, national security, and governance taking centre stage. The atmosphere was charged, the opposition relentless, and the government on the defensive, making this one of the most gripping political clashes in recent memory. If you enjoy in-depth political analysis and real-time reactions to the biggest stories shaping Britain, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to British Focus so you never miss an update. Your support helps us continue bringing you the latest developments straight from Westminster. Now, let's get straight into it. Watch as the Prime Minister and opposition leaders go head-to-head in a debate that will shape the political landscape in the coming weeks.
The Ukraine family scheme. And in total, over 200,000 Ukrainians, mostly women, children and the elderly, have found sanctuary in the UK from Putin's war. However, a family of 6 from Gaza have applied to live in Britain using this scheme, and a judge has now ruled in their favour. This is not what the scheme was designed to do. This decision is completely wrong. It cannot be allowed to stand. Is the government planning to appeal on any points of law? And if so, which ones?
Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. I do not agree with the decision. She's right. It's the wrong decision. She hasn't quite done her homework because the decision in question was taken under the last government, according to the legal framework of the last government. But, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear. It should be Parliament that makes the rules on immigration. It should be the government that makes the policy. That is the principle, and the Home Secretary is already looking at the legal loophole which we need to close in this particular case.
Mr. Speaker, he did not answer the question. If he plans to appeal, then the appeal may be unsuccessful and the law will need to be changed. And if he does not appeal, the law definitely will need to be changed. He talks about a decision made under the last government. It was not made by the last government, it was made by the courts. The issue we are discussing today is about judicial decisions. We cannot be in a situation where we allow enormous numbers of people to exploit our laws in this way. There are millions of people all around the world in terrible situations. We cannot help them all, and we certainly cannot bring them all here. Will he commit to bringing forward that new legislation or amending his borders bill?
Prime Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already said the Home Secretary has already got her team working on closing this loophole. We don't need to wait for that. We're getting on with that because we're taking control. They lost control of immigration. We had nearly 1 million people come into this country, had an open borders experiment. On a Monday of this week, they voted against increased powers to deal with those that are running the vile trade of people smuggling. Same old Tories, open borders, empty promises.
Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister was on top of his brief, perhaps he'd be able to answer some questions. Given this crazy decision and so many others, new legislation is needed to clarify the right to a family life in Article 8. I'm not talking about what he just said. I know Labour MPs don't understand much of what they're saying, but the Prime Minister literally wrote a book on the European Convention on Human Rights. This is a situation where we need to put our national interest before the ECHR. Does he agree that we should legislate even if lawyers warn that this might be incompatible with human rights law?
She complains about scripted answers and questions. Her script doesn't allow her to listen to the answer.
Prime Minister.
She asked me if we're going to change the law and close the loophole in question 1. I said yes. She asked me again in question 2, and I said yes. She asked me again in question 3. It's still yes.
Mr. Speaker, he didn't listen to question 1. I asked if he would appeal the decision. He did not answer that. He's not listening. He's too busy defending the international human rights law framework. Mr. Speaker, this case has arisen because a Palestinian came to the UK from Gaza in 2007. He is now a British citizen. This is precisely why we need to break the conveyor belt from arriving in the UK to acquiring indefinite leave to remain, and then a British passport, and now a right to bring 6 family members here as well. Just last week, the Prime Minister bizarrely claimed that a British passport was not a pull factor for those coming to the UK. Will he now support our plans to toughen the process on indefinite leave to remain and make getting a British passport a privilege, not a right?
Prime Minister.
Speaker, they presided over record high levels of immigration. Reached nearly 1 million. It was a one-nation experiment in open borders. And she was the cheerleader. She was the one campaigning for more people to come and thanking her own side when they supported her campaign. So before she lectures us, I think she needs to reflect on her own record here.
Mr. Speaker, he is the Prime Minister now. The people out there want to know what he is going to do about the situation. He needs to spend less time whining about the last government and do his job. I thought, Mr. Speaker, that the Prime Minister and I both agreed that Israel had a right to defend herself. Yet the judge in this case noted that the family were facing a humanitarian crisis, and I quote, as a consequence of the Israeli government's indiscriminate attempts to eliminate Hamas, and government lawyers accepted this. Is the Prime Minister allowing lawyers to change the position on Israel? And was this because of advice from the Attorney General? And if not, why on earth did government lawyers accept the argument that Israeli actions were indiscriminate?
Prime Minister.
They put the complete opposite argument. She talks about on top of her breath. She has no idea what she's talking about. I'll tell her again. We need to change the law. That's why the Home Secretary is already closing the gap. I know the script doesn't allow any adaptation, but this is getting tedious.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has not read the judgment. I suggest that he does. There are very serious questions now. Being asked about the Attorney General, the Prime Minister's personal friend and donor. Even Labour ministers are concerned. One Labour peer, Lord Glassman, has called him the absolute archetype of an arrogant progressive fool. If we are serious about protecting our borders, we need to make sure we appoint people who believe in our country and everything we stand for. It is not clear the Attorney General does. The government is now recruiting a new Chief Inspector of Borders who lives in Finland and wants to work from home. This is not serious. Why should the British public put up with this?
Prime Minister.
The individual in question was appointed in 2019 by the last government to a senior position. He then worked for 5 years from Finland. We've changed that, and he's now going to be working from the United Kingdom full-time. Finland under them. And she talks about the Attorney General. She sat round the cabinet table with an attorney who was later sacked for breaching national security.
Charlotte Littles.
It is absolutely astonishing how time and time again, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party managed to dodge fundamental questions on immigration, national security, and judicial overreach. During this latest Prime Minister's questions, we witnessed yet another display of Starmer's favourite tactic, sidestepping, deflecting, and ultimately failing to provide any real answers on one of the most pressing issues facing the UK today: illegal migration and the role of judicial activism in overriding government policy. Let's start with the controversy surrounding the Ukraine family scheme, which was originally designed to provide sanctuary to those fleeing Putin's war. Over 200,000 Ukrainian refugees, primarily women, children, and the elderly, have found safety in the UK thanks to this scheme. And yet, in what can only be described as a complete distortion of its original purpose, a court ruling has now allowed a family of 6 from Gaza to settle in Britain using this same framework. A ruling that is not only legally questionable but also exposes the blatant manipulation of our immigration laws. This, of course, raises the fundamental question: who exactly is in charge of immigration policy in this country? The elected government, accountable to the British people, or an increasingly activist judiciary, operating with impunity to reshape laws without any democratic mandate? The Home Secretary has rightly pointed out that this decision was made under the legal framework of the previous government, meaning it was bound by outdated and inadequate legislation that is clearly being exploited. But instead of supporting efforts to close these legal loopholes, Starmer prefers to grandstand, questioning whether the government will appeal the ruling rather than offering any solutions of his own. And this is precisely the problem. While the government is working to tighten border controls and ensure that immigration laws serve the national interest, Labour is content to sit back, criticise, and do nothing. Starmer refuses to acknowledge that Britain cannot simply be a destination for every asylum seeker or economic migrant who wishes to enter. There are millions of people in dire situations across the globe, and while Britain has a proud history of providing sanctuary, it is simply not possible to accommodate everyone. The idea that any rejection of an asylum application is a moral failing is not just naive, it is dangerous. The crux of the issue is this: Labour has no coherent immigration policy. They refuse to support robust measures to stop small boat crossings, they oppose stricter border enforcement, and they would rather allow a legal free-for-all than admit that Britain's system is being exploited. The Rwanda plan? They rejected it. Strengthening deportation measures? They fought against it. Closing the asylum loopholes? They opposed it. And yet, Starmer has the audacity to demand answers from the Prime Minister while offering nothing but vague, meaningless rhetoric. And then, of course, we come to the European Convention on Human Rights, ECHR. This outdated, bureaucratic straitjacket continues to obstruct Britain's ability to control its own borders. Time and again, legal challenges citing Article 8, the right to a family life, have prevented deportations, overruled government policy, and created loopholes that foreign criminals and illegal migrants exploit with ease. Starmer, who literally wrote a book on human rights law, is so deeply entrenched in this legalistic mindset that he refuses to even consider reforming Britain's relationship with the ECHR. Let's be clear, no international convention should have the power to dictate Britain's immigration policy. The argument that any deviation from the ECHR would make Britain a pariah on the world stage is absurd. Countries across Europe are already pushing back against these restrictive frameworks. Denmark, for example, has implemented policies that prioritize national interest over rigid interpretations of human rights law. Why should Britain be any different? If our own courts are unable to uphold the interests of the British public over the whims of foreign judges in Strasbourg, then it is time to rethink our commitment to the ECHR. But Starmer? He would rather Britain remain shackled to an unaccountable legal system that prioritizes the rights of illegal migrants over the security of British citizens. Every time the government tries to take back control, Labour cries foul, accusing ministers of undermining the rule of law. But whose law are we talking about? The law as decided by Parliament and accountable to the electorate, or the law as dictated by unelected judges who answer to no one? And then there is the latest controversy regarding the UK's stance on Israel and Gaza. A judge, in ruling on this Gaza family's asylum case, stated that the applicants were facing a humanitarian crisis due to Israel's indiscriminate actions in its war against Hamas. The problem? Government lawyers reportedly accepted this argument in court. This raises serious questions. Was this a strategic legal mistake, or was it a reflection of shifting attitudes within the government's own legal team? Either way, it is an extraordinary statement that risks legitimizing a deeply biased narrative about Israel's right to defend itself. Starmer, who claims to support Israel's right to self-defense, has been suspiciously quiet about this aspect of the case. He knows that large sections of his party are virulently anti-Israel, and rather than standing firm on Britain's support for its democratic ally, he is content to let government lawyers make legal concessions that weaken our diplomatic stance. And as if all of this wasn't enough, we then learn that the government's Chief Inspector of Borders, the individual responsible for ensuring immigration enforcement is effective, has been working from Finland. For 5 years. Let that sink in. At a time when Britain is grappling with record-high immigration, an overburdened asylum system, and an increasing number of security risks posed by unchecked migration, the person meant to be in charge of border inspections wasn't even in the country. And yet again, Labour has nothing to say about it. No outrage, no demands for accountability, just silence. So, what do we take from all of this? Starmer and Labour have no plan. No plan to fix immigration, no plan to close asylum loopholes, no plan to stand up to judicial overreach, and certainly no plan to defend Britain's interests on the global stage. What we saw in Prime Minister's questions was the same old Starmer, dodging, deflecting, criticising, but never offering any real solutions. The reality is simple. If Labour were in charge, Britain's borders would be even weaker, illegal migration would spiral further out of control, and unelected judges would continue to dictate national policy without challenge. The government has made it clear, loopholes will be closed, immigration rules will be strengthened, and control will be taken back. But the question remains, will Labour ever support measures that actually protect British interests, or will they continue their endless game of obstruction and political posturing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Is Starmer completely out of touch on immigration? Or does Labour have any real answers?